Well, I absolutely, I'm Bill Rippy, and I was born in Craig, Colorado, in 1935. That makes me kind of ancient, like 77. Um, I, uh, what I'm going to talk on is the history of the Craig Hyde and Fur Company and Craig Steel and Salvage Company, and how it started and where it went, and how the railroad really helped that business in both ways. Just a little quick history on the owners. Mr. Hawkins, my dad's partner, came from Rock Springs, Wyoming in probably around 1938. And my dad came from Oklahoma when he was 13 into Rollins on a train, and they had a tag around his neck telling where he was going to go. He was going to go to Craig, and he came from Rollins down here on a wagon. So that's how they kind of came to this part of the country. And Mr. Hawkins had started a fur business here in around 1938. And a little later, him and his dad actually started it. And a little later, they had met my father, and they liked him, and so they got him to go to work for him, and eventually made him a partner in the business. And I believe that it was around 1939 or 38 when they leased the property where the Craig Steel and Salvage and Craig Hyde and Fur Company was from the railroad. That was leased property. And I always understood that that was a 100-year lease. And that was what they worked on. Okay, where do I hold this so you guys? You're getting a good picture of it. That was the building. And that's where they bought all the furs and all the hides that came in there. And then they had a big yard out there where they bought scrap iron. And let's go back about when the war started. They handled a lot of scrap iron, and I think all the ranchers and farmers in this part of the country had some scrap yards, and so they could make money bringing it in, and it was for the war effort too. And then I'll say we a lot because I grew up down here. We would load the scrap iron on the railroad cars and send it out to the, most of it went to Pueblo, I think, where they had where they would melt it down out there and make new steel out of it. And there was a lot of that went out of here. But during the war, Mr. Hawkins went into the Air Force. He actually was a pilot. He had an open cock type airplane here at the time in the 30s. And so he was a pilot. He went into the Air Force, and they made an officer out of him. And he trained for what they call the Alaska Hawk. He trained pilots to fly into Fairbanks, Alaska. Well, my dad stayed here and kept buying scrap iron and so forth. And then he was told as long as he kept shipping scrap iron, he wouldn't have to go into service. But he got tired of loading scrap iron, and he went down and told the guy that was in charge of inducting all the people around here in the service he wasn't going to load anymore, and 2 weeks later he was in the service. And during that time, the warehouse was pretty well shut down, except my mother and my father's partner's wife, Agatha Hawkins, would go down and open it up for a few days every week and buy a paper or scrap iron or whatever came in. When the war ended, my father, neither one of them went over into the war. My father stayed in the States. He came home and opened the warehouse back up, and they proceeded in doing the same thing they were doing. They bought a lot of fur. They would, I think I'll name some of that off. There were a lot of coyotes and beaver, muskrats, marten, weasels, skunks, the whole works. I can't think of anything else. Oh, bobcats. And, you know, we have, I don't know if you're all aware of the fact that they planted lynx cats back in this part of the country, and probably many years ago they used to be here. But I don't think we ever had a lynx cat go through here that came from this part of the country. We had some, but they came out of Montana. And the fur business was still a big business all through the years. There was times when the game and fish would shut down trappers around it. A lot of people trapped because they made good money at it. And they would shut it down for a while, and that's kind of when the bootlegging kind of came into effect, and that's another story. But and then they would open it up again. Now here's a picture of a pickup with coyote skins, and I'm the little guy. I was probably smaller than you guys. There, that's my dad and my uncle. There, but that's a lot of coyote skins, and that's just a small portion of what they bought. And during the war effort, they shipped a lot of scrap iron out of here. That this was probably taken in the early 40s. This picture here, that's my dad standing up there. And of course, here's another picture of his partner standing up there for the same thing, but I think it's important. During that, and back to the use of the railroads, we shipped a lot of. Well, let's go here. We bought beef hides, and we would bring them down there to the warehouse and sold them, and we had huge piles of beef hides in here. And when we get enough to ship, we'd ship them out with the railroad in boxcars. And to do that, we always had to shake the salt off of them before they went into the boxcar. But when they got to their destiny, they shook them again because they were always buying that stuff by the pound. So they didn't want to buy salt. But then we reused the salt. And we shipped a lot of beef hides out of here. And my dad and his partner would set up little satellite places all over the country that would, buy and gather beef hides for them. And they'd bring them all here to be shipped out. And we also bought, being in the junk business and metal business and so forth, bought a lot of junk batteries. Everybody had a junk battery, and I didn't like that. And I wasn't much bigger than you guys, and they had me down there breaking those holes off those batteries so we could load the lead into those cars. And that's the way that they got out of here, was through the boxcars on the railroad. And I lost a lot of pants, that acid eating on me. But, and then also, at one time, my dad and his partner were the biggest game skin dealers in the western United States. And they had satellite people set around the country that bought for them. And they bought the elk and deer hides. And then we would ship them out by freight in the boxcars. And of course we had to gather all that stuff. He even set up a deal with the Rainbow Girls all over this country where they would set up barrels and ask for donations for deer hides and so forth. And then when I got old enough to drive, I'd go around and pick them up in Leadville, all over the country. And anyway, I grew up down there. I'd love to go down there and watch those trains coming in with the working people on there. Then they would switch the trains out, and right beside that warehouse here that I showed you the picture of, there was a siding that they would park the car when we got ready to load them, and then we'd load the cars up with whatever we was sending out. And but I always loved to watch those trains down there and watch the workmen. And well, in fact, my dad and his partner had a little poker game going in their office all the time. And those guys used to, when they got a little free time, they'd come and play poker. And I was never allowed to touch that table, that poker table. I always thought that I loved to look at it. It just fascinated me. And there was a lot of businessmen here, and Craig went down and played poker down here. Any way to make a dollar. And then later, well, let's go back to right after the war, the Rangeley oil field was being drilled in, and when the drilling rigs moved out down there, my dad was related to some of the people from Oklahoma that was down there, and they called him down and asked him and told him that he could have all the scrap iron they left. And they left a lot of the drilling rigs down there. They didn't haul everything out because the boom was over with and the money wasn't there, and it was a long ways to truck it. So I used to ride with him a lot, going to Rangeley and picking up all that scrap iron down there. And it was big stuff. We didn't know what we was picking up back then. And a little bit later, when we were bringing that into Craig, the people that had left it, they had a boom in Oklahoma, and they called my dad, and he was supposed to destroy everything that he picked up, but he hadn't. And they would ask him, they said, did you destroy this? And he said, no. And so he put it on the trains and sent it out there so they could reuse it. And so that railroad was used a lot. But that eventually got us into the oil field business. And we, well, actually my dad and his partner did drill a few oil wells, gas wells. And they were small, but they made money. But I think most of the money they made, they put back in the ground.